Today we're going to talk about the Asr time. The author says, due to the report of Imam Muslim, the afternoon prayer starts immediately after Dhuhr. Yani there's no gap between Dhuhr and Asr because there's an authentic hadith reported by Muslim. وقت الظهر ما لم يحضر العصر. Dhuhr time is as long as Asr was not in. So that's an authentic hadith. It is called Asr because of its mu'asara, its closeness to sunset. Or it's called Asr simply named after its time, the Asr time, the afternoon time. Like in the dictionary As-Sahah. And Asr time is the fifth time for Dhuhr. So he said whoever studies will count Dhuhr as having 5 times. The Asr time is the fifth time for Dhuhr time. So what are the 5 times for Dhuhr time? The first one is the meritorious time, which is when it first comes in. And that's true for all 5 prayers according to the Shafi'i school. The meritorious time for all 5 prayers is as soon as the prayer time commences. So that's the first time for Dhuhr, the meritorious time. The second time for Dhuhr is the permissible time without dislikeness. Permissible time without dislikeness. Permissible means doesn't go into haram time. Permissible time without dislikeness, which for Dhuhr time is all the way to the end of the time. That means there is no dislike time inside of Dhuhr time. As long as you start your prayer, your Dhuhr prayer, at a time that enables you to finish it inside the Dhuhr time, even if by the time you say Assalamu alaikum, Dhuhr went out and Asr came in, there's no dislikeness in that. So the second Dhuhr time, the second block of time for Dhuhr time is the permissible time without dislikeness, which is the whole rest of the prayer time. So the meritorious time is as soon as it comes in. That's when you get the highest reward. That's when it's most rewardable. Then, if you delay it, it won't be like praying right at the very beginning, but there's no dislike time for Dhuhr. So that's 2 blocks of time. Third block of time for Dhuhr is actually broken into 2. So that's going to make 4. But before we break it into 2, we're going to just count it as 1. So the third block of time for Dhuhr is the haram time. Haram time is delaying Dhuhr until you cannot fit the entire prayer inside of its time. That's haram. And from here, some scholars say Dhuhr has 3 times. If you say Dhuhr only has 3 times, then you're not going to be counting the Asr time as a Dhuhr time, as a time for Dhuhr. And you won't be breaking that third time into 2. But if you break the third time into 2 different times, both of them are haram times. But one of them is called waqtul idrak, the time of catching prayer. Yani the time of still praying on time. It's forbidden to delay your prayer until you can't fit the entire time. Until you can't fit the entire prayer in its time. That's haram. But if you can fit at least 1 rak'ah of the prayer inside of its own time, then at least it's considered as having prayed on time. So that's 1 block of time. The time in which, even though it's haram, it's not a makeup prayer because you're able to fit at least 1 rak'ah inside that time. And the other haram time is when it becomes a makeup prayer, which is that you delayed it so much that you cannot even fit one rak'ah of the prayer inside of its time. So then, I'll repeat for you. Dhuhr time has 5 times. 1, meritorious time at the beginning of its time. 2, permissible time without dislikeness. That's all the way till the end of time, the end of the Dhuhr time. 3, forbidden time, but still considered praying on time. That's to delay the prayer until you cannot fit the entire prayer inside of its time, but at least you can fit one rak'ah inside of its time. Or delaying the prayer until you cannot even fit an entire rak'ah, until you cannot even fit one rak'ah of the prayer inside of its time. And 5, which is called waqtul udhr, excuse time. Excuse time is asr time. When you have an excuse, you can pray dhuhr at asr time. So that means asr time is a time for dhuhr sometimes. That makes 5 blocks of time for dhuhr. And so asr time is the 5th time, the 5th block of time for dhuhr during a journey. When a person's a traveler, according to the rules we'll see, inshallah, when we get to that section. Or sickness, according to some. According to some, if you're sick and you think you'll be better, if you're sick at dhuhr, you feel like you'll feel lighter at asr, you can delay dhuhr until asr time. And some said sickness is not an excuse. And according to that, then, the only way for asr to be a time for dhuhr is during a journey. So under conditions, one will have been obligated to intend at dhuhr time to delay it until asr time. If you're on this journey and you fulfill all the conditions, then at dhuhr time, you can make the intention to delay and pray dhuhr at asr time. Then, if you do that, neither sequence nor succession is conditional. Meaning, if you pray dhuhr at asr time, you don't have to pray dhuhr before asr. You could pray asr before dhuhr. And you don't have to pray them back to back. So you can pray dhuhr and leave a gap, leave some considerable time and then pray asr, or even pray asr first and then leave some considerable time and then pray dhuhr. But it's better to keep the prayers in order. Also, dhuhr time is excused for asr prayer under the same conditions, which we didn't talk about the conditions yet. Dhuhr time is also excused for asr prayer. That means dhuhr time is a time for asr prayer under the same conditions. And for heavy rain too. For heavy rain, you can pray asr at dhuhr time. We'll talk about it in its own section. In a place of congregation and performed in congregation. For heavy rain, in a place of congregation, like a masjid or a musalla, performed in congregation, not for one to pray it on his own, to pray dhuhr and say, oh, it's raining so heavy, I'm going to pray asr now. This is why dhuhr prayer would be performed if a prohibitive matter ceases at asr time. Like if the woman's period goes off at asr time, and she has enough time to say Allahu Akbar before the time goes out, before the sun goes down, she would have to pray Dhuhr and Asr, although her period went off at Asr time. Why she has to pray Dhuhr? Because Asr time is a time for Dhuhr sometimes. So she'll have to pray Dhuhr and Asr, as shall come. And Asr too has 5 times. Its preferred time ends when Asr starts according to Abu Hanifa. The preferred time of Asr, and we're talking Shafi'i school here, so the meritorious time we already covered. It's at the beginning, the very beginning of the time. That's one block of time for Asr. Then Asr has another block of time, which is the preferred time. So its preferred time ends when Asr time starts according to Abu Hanifa, meaning according to Ash-Shafi'i, Asr time will have already come in. And according to Abu Hanifa, Asr is not in yet. The preferred time of Asr ends when the shadow's length is double that of the object. And that's when Asr time starts according to Abu Hanifa. That's when Asr time starts according to Abu Hanifa. When the shadow is double that of the object. But when is Asr time in according to a Shafi'i? When the shadow of an object is as long as the object, plus as long as the shadow was when the sun was at its zenith. So what that means is, when does Asr come in? Let's say that you live somewhere when the sun is at its zenith, there's no shadow. If you live somewhere that when the sun is at its zenith, there's no shadow, then that means that Asr time is going to come in when the shadow is as long as the object that casts it at that location. In that location, Asr time will come in when the shadow is as long as whatever casts it, and that's it, period. Because there's no shadow at zenith time. But if you have a shadow at zenith time, then Asr time comes in when the shadow is as long as whatever casts it after whatever exists of the zenith shadow. Yani on top of that zenith shadow. So you have zenith shadow. Now, add the length of the object that's casting the shadow on top of that zenith shadow. When the shadow gets that long, that's when Asr starts. The shadow's still not yet double the length of the object. According to Abu Hanifa, Dhuhr comes in, Asr comes in. According to Abu Hanifa, Asr comes in when the shadow is twice as long as the object. So Asr will have already been in according to Ash-Shafi'i. It's not yet in according to Abu Hanifa. Let me know if that's not clear, please. Gabriel did not delay further than that, according to what the Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. وصلى بي العصر حين كان ظله مثليه. Gabriel on the second day, he prayed Asr with me when the shadow was twice its length, twice the length of whatever's casting the shadow. However, this means in addition to any zenith shadow. So you want to pray before that, before the sun gets that, before the shadow gets that long. You want to pray before the shadow gets that long. Its avoided time, yani makruh time, dislike time, is not sinful. Delaying until the sun yellows. Until the sun yellows means you could look at the sun, it doesn't hurt your eyes. And you can see the yellow light of the sun on the walls. That's before sunset. About a half hour before sunset, until just before sunset. This is not haram, but it's disliked, should be avoided. Not haram as opposed to some Malikis who deem that emergency time. Emergency time means forbidden without an excuse. According to the Maliki school, forbidden without an excuse. This avoided time, which is not haram in the Shafi'i school, that's emergency time, according to the Malikis. So if you want to be safe, pray before that time, because if you don't have an excuse, then according to the Malikis, you'll be sinful. Because in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ compared this to the hypocrite's prayer. The hypocrite, the one who he doesn't believe in Islam really, although he shows himself as a Muslim, he, as they say these days, he presents as a Muslim. But since he's not really a Muslim and he doesn't have faith in his heart, he doesn't really want to pray. The faithful Muslim, he wants to pray. Even if he feels lazy, he can't take it and he gets up and he prays. But the hypocrite doesn't want to pray. And if there wasn't anyone around to see him, he wouldn't pray. So that time is the time of the hypocrite's prayer. So better for you to pray before the time the hypocrites would pray. It is unrewarded at that time without an excuse. An excuse is like forgetting or sleeping or working. So the excuse is not difficult for the Asr time, that late Asr time, yani, towards the end of Asr time, the avoided time. The excuse to have reward is not difficult because it could be that you're just busy. You have something you're doing, you couldn't stop yet to do it. When I say couldn't, doesn't mean impossible, but it just means that you're doing something. You want to finish what you're doing and then pray. So that's an excuse. Not like you're just goofing around. So that's not an excuse. And forgetting is an excuse, and sleeping is an excuse. Forgetting, sleeping, and working, that as a result of any of these three, you prayed Asr at the avoided time, it won't be disliked for you. So it's still rewardable for you. And after praying Asr, prayer is forbidden until sunset. We already said that in previous lesson when we talked about the times when praying is haram. I usually like to avoid repetition, but it's a good spot here. This is good repetition here. So to help us master the book of prayer. SubhanAllah, I don't know about you, but I'm benefiting greatly from this book of prayer. Now I have better appreciation for the chapter of prayer and its details, the whole clockwork of it, and the science of it. So after praying Asr, yani after you say the Salam and finish your Asr prayer, then prayer is forbidden until sunset. We already said what that means before in a previous lesson. So according to this, the earlier one prays, even if he prayed at Dhuhr time, even if he prayed Asr at Dhuhr time, the earlier one prays, then the longer this disliked time will be in. Disliked here means haram. Praying Asr, praying after Asr is haram without an excuse, which we talked about that. We said excuse means a prior reason or a current reason. So you need to review what that means if you don't remember. So the earlier one prays Asr, even if he prayed Asr at Dhuhr time because he's a traveler, or because of rain, or because of sickness, according to those who validate that, then the longer this disliked time will be, this time that one should avoid praying, yani it's haram. We're going by just saying that it's haram to pray after Asr. Some say it's disliked. Some say it's haram. Both groups say it won't even be initiated. The prayer at that time won't be initiated. Some said it's not haram though, you don't get a sin, but it won't start. And others, they said that's haram, you can't do that. That's what we're going by here. So after praying Asr, prayer is forbidden until sunset. And the earlier one prays, the longer this disliked time will be. Then when the sun yellows, prayer is forbidden. That's second thing. That's not same thing. If you remember that lesson, review it. Then when the sun yellows, prayer is forbidden. So prayer is going to be forbidden after you say the salam for Asr. And then during the Asr time, when the sun yellows, prayer is forbidden. Even without having prayed Asr. Even without having prayed Asr. That doesn't mean you're not going to pray Asr though. You are going to pray Asr. Because that's a prior reason. A prior reason. So when the sun yellows, prayer is forbidden even without having prayed Asr. Meaning the prayer becomes forbidden, praying becomes forbidden when the sun yellows, and that's not related to praying Asr. It's just merely related to that time of the sun yellowing. Review that lesson we took about forbidden prayer times. So when the sun yellows, prayer is forbidden even without having prayed Asr. You're still going to pray Asr though if you didn't pray. Until the upper disk of the sun dips completely below the horizon, which is the end of Asr time. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, وَصَلَّى بِيَ الْمَغْرِبَ حِينَ أَفْطَرَ الصَّائِمُ. Jibreel prayed Maghrib with me when the fasting person breaks fast, which is sunset. Wallahu a'lam. Allah knows best. We'll stop there. We'll have a short lesson today also.